Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Mass General Hospital telecardiology program, which is where she's streaming from live, seeing congenital heart disease patients and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist settings. We support a number of traditional medtech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We love working with them. We work with a variety of them in different spaces. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for the clinicians and for the patients. You can find us giving local, national, and international talks regularly. I was delighted to have emceed the ATA conference this last Thursday, and this upcoming Tuesday is the last day. So if you are attending the ATA, you can look for me from last Thursday. You should also look for our Springer first ever textbook on digital health to be published soon. And I mean, am I correct in that we have another textbook author on the show today too, which I just found out?
We do. We have another textbook author on the show today.
Everyone should get excited about this textbook.
It's going to be great.
MedTech Insights is a live, weekly, interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview two guest leaders in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. You can watch us live on the Facebook page, either Ami or my personal Facebook page, the Vanguard.Health YouTube page, or through my personal LinkedIn page. We love interacting with you. We love when you follow. We love when you comment. So if you comment in any of these places, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, we will include those comments as part of the show. We love, and our guests love it too, when you ask questions. So please share your questions. All shows are recorded and available after the fact at our website, Vanguard.Health/MedTech Insights. Be sure to keep up with the show by joining our mailing list. Look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Over to you, Ami.
Thank you so much. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So today we're really excited. We're going to talk about predictive analytics, which always gets us interested in both the companies that are doing this, what the future can look like, and really where we're headed in healthcare. So that'll be great. Just as a reminder, both Dr. Joe and myself, as well as our guests, all represent our own opinions, not those of the companies with whom we work or with whom we affiliate. It has been a busy couple weeks in the healthcare industry right now, both in biotech and digital health. We've had a lot of companies with a lot of success, and we've had some beautiful new research coming out. So excited to have invited some of those people in the upcoming weeks as well. So I think we're going to have an incredibly fun and exciting summer and fall lineup ahead. I think we're already into October now, so that'll be great. Today, we have two people. We have Dr. Umang Bhatt and Henry Peck. They're going to tell you when we bring them on together as to how they know each other. But we'll start with Henry. Henry's a product and marketing leader in MedTech. He's currently at Altoida, and he's building the smart and personal future of brain health, which has been all over the news lately, as we've heard. His background includes work in surgical robotics, exoskeletons, and prosthetics with global strategic and startups. And he's received a BS from Carnegie Mellon University. So why don't we start by bringing on Henry?
Welcome, Henry. And Ami, sorry, I wasn't sure if you said bring Henry out and then Umang, but we have Henry. Yay!
Thanks, guys. Thanks for bringing me up. Really excited to be here. And I always love the little intro clap track. That's one of my favorite parts of the show.
We're so happy to have you with us. So you, Henry, just for our audience, you have had quite a course in getting to where you are now. You've done, a couple different things in leading up to this. You're also doing things kind of outside of kind of MedTech, the day job that we'd love to chat about as well. But maybe will you start by just telling our audience a little bit about, where your course has taken you and how you ended up with Altoida?
Sure. So I have a background in engineering. I've always been extremely passionate about healthcare, medical technology, and a lot of it goes back to my own childhood. I had a really unique series of eye surgeries when I was young, and you can kind of see the scars there and there, but I essentially had a condition where the muscles and nerves in my eyelids were not fully developed. And so I had a bunch of eye surgeries as a child, and really because of those surgeries, I'm able to see today, which is something they did not think I'd be able to do. They said I would never be able to drive a car, get my license, things like that. So I'm extremely grateful to the professionals in this community who gave me that ability, and I've dedicated my professional career to this space as well. After receiving my engineering degree, I realized that my path was much more on the customer facing side of things. And I really loved interacting with people, interacting with providers and payers, and just the complex network of stakeholders in this space. So I moved more into the product management and marketing side of things. Spent some time with Johnson & Johnson in their surgical robotics division after they acquired Auris Health and Verb Surgical and started building that new, really exciting robotics and digital solutions vision. And earlier this year, I left and joined Altoida, which is a really exciting new startup spun out of Switzerland, built on the back of 20 years of scientific research by one of the smartest scientists I think has ever existed today, Dr. Yannis Tarnana. And he has found a way essentially to analyze the brain in a hyper-realistic, high-load scenario. And the potential from that is endless. And that's what we're looking to kind of capture in the bottle and commercialize at Altoida. So I'm really excited to be part of the company. We just moved the office to DC, but I'm coming to you from San Diego right now. So super happy to be here.
Fantastic. That's so, I have to say, when you say, hyper realistic, coming back from COVID into the office and having all these patients come in, I kind of feel like I'm living in a hyper realistic world almost every minute of every day. I love origin stories, and Henry, yours is a great origin story, right? To be grateful for what people could do and now to do so much for others. So at your request, Henry, you had asked to bring Umang on soon. And so I will introduce him next. And then maybe we'll go back to some product examples with you.
Yeah, and right before we introduce Umang, so glad to have you watching from San Diego. We have some of our guests who are watching. We have Akim, who is watching from Malawi, Mizuzu. Welcome, Akim. We have Tony Chung, who is, we're not sure where Tony is watching, but he's happy and delighted to be here. And he's the CEO of Instant Nano Biosensor. So happy to have you watching. Please share who you are, where you're watching from, and what you're working on. Ami, we're going to bring Umang over next. I'm sorry, I am sweating. It is so hot here in Boston, and I don't have central AC, so I apologize for that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We're going to be fortunate to get a little cooler. I don't know that the same's happening for the Pacific Northwest, so I'm fingers crossed for that. We'll bring Umang on next. Umang is a PhD candidate in the machine learning group at the University of Cambridge. His research lies in transparency, fairness, and robustness of machine learning systems, incredibly important. And he's a fellow at the Mozilla Foundation. He was a research fellow at the Partnership on AI. And before moving to the UK, which is where he is coming to us from today, he received his BS and MS from Carnegie Mellon University. I'm seeing this trend of having degrees from Carnegie Mellon University. And so perhaps that is our connection. We'll bring Umang on and you guys can tell us all about it.
Welcome, Umang.
Hey, folks. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so excited to have you. And thank you for contributing to the book. It has an ISBN number. So the first book in cardiology telemedicine will be out soon. And our discussions on AI and trust will come from Dr. Bhatt. So that'll be exciting. So your story, Umang, but before we get to it, we invited the two of you to the show, and we then learned that you have known each other for quite a while. Let's go there for a minute because our audience loves this. How do we know each other?
Go ahead, Umang, tell them.
So Henry and I had met, nearly half a decade ago when we were both probably in the first week we started our undergrads at CMU. We've been friends ever since, joined the same fraternity in college. And my favorite thing about Henry, which I want to say here in public for the record, is our junior year. We're sitting down, probably having lunch somewhere, and Henry comes up to me. He's like, "Can you review a master's proposal I've written?" And he wanted to do a master's, combining his English interests and his biomedical science interests on narrative medicine. And from that point on, I knew he was going to do incredible things, right? At the intersection of telling stories and providing medical care to customers. And that's basically what he's doing now. And to see him live this dream is absolutely incredible. And it's a pleasure.
That is a beautiful story. Narrative medicine is small, underrepresented, not discussed very much, but incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Umang reviewed that for me. I needed his expertise. Really, the genesis of that was taking narrative medicine techniques and applying it to bioengineering and healthcare technology. So we called it, after our conversation, what we call it, narrative-inspired biomedical engineering, or narrative medicine and engineering, something along that title. I ended up leaving university for an exciting industry opportunity before I finished it, but I had it all kind of wrapped up with Carnegie Mellon, which was exciting. But Umang was always trying to get me to help contribute to some paper or something. He was publishing more than I knew was even allowed when he was still an undergrad. So really exciting to see what he's doing at Cambridge now and with Mozilla.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love this story. So Dr. Bhatt, maybe you can take us through just a little bit of what you're doing now, where you are, what you're working on for our audience so they can get a feel for that.
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me here. Most of my work currently is a little bit less product focused and thinking a little bit more critically about what kind of future do we want to create for AI systems. Specifically in healthcare, if we were thinking about how can we leverage the expertise of a clinician and the predictive power of algorithmic systems to kind of create this tandem, this human AI team that can provide us with not only accurate systems, but also systems that are transparent and fair, and are robust to different changes in the world. So one of the major problems we solve from an optimization perspective is how do you take a model trained on data from one hospital and transfer it to another hospital? It's a fundamental problem that basically plagues us and has some really difficult mathematical intricacies to it, which we've studied as well. So happy to be here and paint a picture of what kind of direction we're headed in and some of our trustworthiness work that we've been working on.
That's fantastic. So exciting. So exciting. So Jen, any comments from the audience, or can we maybe take a look at the product example that I think Henry has brought, and we can use that as a jumping point for talking about.
We do have a few comments from the audience. We have Massimo from Boston, who is, I think, business development at head of worldwide business development at AWS, who is interested in analytics in the medtech field. So thank you, Massimo, for watching. And we also have Dr. Susanna Scaglione. Thank you, Dr. Susanna Scaglione, for watching. She is Chief Scientific Officer at Entrepreneur-C. Sorry, Susanna. And she's watching from Durham, North Carolina. So glad to, oh, and of course, okay. Why not?
There it is. Sandeep is there.
We can't
my God.
We can't have a show without Dr. Sandeep Palum, who we all love and adore. So great to have you, Dr. Palum, again. Would love to hear your questions, comments, opinions, and yes.
Can I jump in with Dr.
Okay,
Sandeep
Henry, tell it. And Henry's this figure in Clubhouse.
I was going to say, I thought I'd be able to avoid the whole topic altogether, but I'm kidding. But no, back in the kind of the earlier phases of Clubhouse, I had helped contribute to the early development of the MedTech community on there, and then specifically the MedTech Club, which was formalized. So shout out to anyone who's been a part of that. But that was actually how Dr. Bhatt and I, not Dr. Umang, Dr. Bhatt and I first connected. I mean, I don't know how we're going to deal with that. That's another thing we're going to have to figure out on this show. But yes, for anybody who's listening, nice to meet you. And Dr. Sandeep is an incredible contributor to that club. So I highly recommend you go follow him, listen to his talks on Clubhouse and all other platforms that he participates in. And he has a fun connection to my current CEO, Travis Bond, from his days at CareSync. So really, really cool stuff.
It's a small world. I love it. I love it. Perfect. Thank you, Sandeep, for doing it so I didn't have to. It's great, actually, bringing up Clubhouse. It's perfect. Henry, do you have something you can maybe show us? I thought would be nice. Our audience loves that.
Yes, I want to caveat again. This is the arc of the company, right? There's been a lot of exciting development in the past year, given our new commercial plans, our updated strategies, things like that. But again, as I mentioned, the science and the tech goes back to tons of research that has been done. And so what I'm showing you is kind of an earlier product video. I'm double clicking it, which should make it go. There we go. So showing an early product video of how our platform can be used in the assessment of brain function. So when we think about today's devices and the ability to assess brain function, a lot of what's out there is pretty limited, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But as you can see here, some of these key things, being able to do it in the home, on your own time and pace in a much more expedited fashion than you're used to in the clinic. So I'll let this roll for a minute and then we'll talk.
Oh, I love that. Well, having fun, so important.
awesome. We can kind of chop it there.
Oh, I really do love the little tiger.
And a lot of this again is kind of early minimum viable product, and there's a lot of exciting things coming on the product front. But what you're seeing there that's super important to us is when you think about the way you assess brain function today. The standard of care is really using these paper and pencil memory tests, the MMSE, the MoCA, et cetera, which are, think of them kind of like the SATs, right? They're a series of questions that are assessing kind of one specific thing. So they're looking at either your memory or your recall ability, trying to look across some different domains. But you can be really good at the SAT and not that smart, right? And I think everybody kind of resonates with that. You can study for this, you can prepare for this, and it's very, very linked to different factors, right? Maybe one day you wake up, you have your coffee, you're feeling great, but the next day you're sick, you're not as motivated, right? All these different environmental and internal factors can affect your performance on these paper and pencil and digital paper and pencil tests, if you will. So the things that use these hyper-specific activities that are not really representative of your brain's true function. And so the genius behind what Altoida has done is we've used augmented reality as a framework to put your brain under a high load. So you're functioning in a hyper-realistic way in augmented reality, 10-minute activities that feel like a game, but they're representative of everyday daily tasks of living that are complex and challenge all aspects of your brain. And so from that, we can get the most granular data that will then allow us to provide the most specific and personalized function analysis of your brain.
That's fantastic. So many things to think about, right? First is just test taking. And so, Dave Brown has a lot to say. So Dave, thank you for being with us, right? Focusing on ER efficiency, awesome video. How did you make that? Dave, we're getting right back to you.
Connect with me on LinkedIn, Dave. We'll talk about it.
There we go. And Dave, once you learn how to do that, you can do that for Jen and I, okay? We're going to keep that in mind that you're learning how to do this now. When we think about test taking, right? I think that's just one concept is both you can cheat the test, right? And you can learn how to. The other thing is if you're not good at doing that test taking, sitting in that room with that pen and paper, we're actually not getting a great assessment of who you are. And that's true in education, but it's especially true in healthcare. I think the other thing to think about, and you emphasize this in the intro to your video, which is kind of fast and slow thinking about Daniel Kahneman, right? And when you are in the office and you are doing these tests with a doctor staring at you in a sterile room, that is terrifying. You're type 1, you're not slowing down to think about what you're doing. You're just kind of racing at it. But I bring that up because you also say hyper augmented kind of reality, right? How much of this is too much and is kind of making it a more stressful environment? How do you know that you're creating something that is the right level of engagement for people to truly be able to improve with? Is there a way to balance that?
Sure, and I think you bring up a good point about the fast and the slow and the variations that would occur. And one of the biggest criticisms of the paper and pencil tests is the bias that different providers can place on it by no fault of their own. Just that experience of being in the office with a provider and having to take it there, like you said. I mean, it may not be the right environment for some. So this framework allows us to deliver it in almost every environment on any iOS or Android smart device. So a phone, a tablet. So you're able to take it kind of in the comfort of a different environment and remove a lot of those other factors. The test itself, because your brain is functioning in its complex activity state where it's not, looking at one specific little thing like memory, which may be a symptom of cognitive impairment. We're really looking at how the brain is processing information, how you're functioning in space. So it's not just looking at these cognitive markers, it's looking at the functional markers of, brain function, of potential neurodegenerative disease, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the big difference here is you're not just putting someone under a really stressful test that's analyzing question and answer, but you're having them move around in space, put things down in a specific order and find them again, having them undergo a dual task condition where they have to be putting things around in space, but simultaneously listening for sounds and tapping when they hear a specific sound. So we kind of remove a lot of the traditional stress that comes with a type form memory questionnaire and make it much more of an activity. So it's the difference between going to your GP and telling them how much you weigh and having them try to assess if you're healthy versus them putting you in the gym and watching you run 10 miles.
That's fantastic. And it's funny. I was actually thinking about interval training when you were saying you're going to do this intensely for 10 minutes. I was like, this is great. This is like 10 minutes of intense brain work. So a question for you, and then I'm going to dovetail that over to Umang for a second. just in terms of predictive analytics, kind of value proposition of Altoida. Would love to kind of hear your summary thoughts about that. And then I will turn it to Umang to say, okay, great, you're doing this, but we have a lot of doctors who do this. We have a lot of clinicians, and this is just in neurology. You know, this is true for a lot of other fields. Where does that change? Where do we go from being competitive with AI to complementary? And is that going to happen? Are we going to be able to do that? So Henry, first to you, a little bit about value proposition, and then Umang to you about how do we turn that to complementary work?
So I want to first caveat, so the Altoida device that you just saw, we have a 513G exemption in the United States, FDA medical device that allows us to assess brain function. So today, that value prop is really being the 4K TV to a 1080p TV, right? We can collect data at a much higher level of resolution with better specificity, less bias, and from that data provide more objective measurements of cognitive performance that are less subject to these little changes day to day and provide a better long-term picture of somebody's transitions or changes in brain health. So that is really the core value prop of what we have today. In the future, what we're working on trying to bring to market is the predictive layer of brain health that will allow us to look at an individual and predict whether or not they are going to develop into a neurodegenerative disease state. So this is all kind of the future state of where we hope brain health can go, which is being able to use data from today to figure out how this person is going to age in the future.
Fantastic. Jen, go ahead. Yep.
I'm just going to pop in because, I mean, you alluded to the concept of complementary to physicians and how we diagnosed brain disease or some degeneration going along the way. I don't know if we have this, meaning finding a neurologist is hard, getting in to see a neurologist is hard. Mm-hmm. I work at the VA hospital in the urgent care and the emergency room. And a lot of what I see is actually, we don't have that layer of picture that Henry is talking about, meaning, are we following them regularly? Are they able to take this level of testing at home in the comfort of their home and also get it over time? So it's a massive struggle for me to have the picture of, is this cognitive change new? And fully assess it, especially if I don't have access to a neurologist, which they are hard to track down sometimes. I love and adore my neurologist. They know me very well. And they don't like getting calls from me at 3 a.m. in the morning. But you say that we have that. Maybe I just haven't seen it, but I think the potential for being able to track it, see it, access it into the comfort of their home and get that visibility where I haven't seen that level of data. Maybe the neurologists have, or maybe there aren't enough neurologists right now to like deploy out to all of the patient population. And
I'll borrow on that, just kind of piggyback. I'll borrow an example or a way of thinking about this from our chief science officer and founder. So if you think about kind of the arc, I might be backwards while I'm doing this because my camera's flipped, but think about kind of an XY curve, X being time and Y being cognitive function on some scale. Really, the curve looks like this, right? There's so much noise day to day, and you want to look at a trend, but you have to deal with all of these, whether it's a trend up or trend down, you have to deal with all of these little changes day to day. So imagine that on day one, I want to assess Umang's brain function. So I bring him into the office, right? I don't know, Umang, maybe you're losing your keys or something's going on, right? We want to assess your brain function. We bring you into the office and they give you one of these paper and pencil tests, right? And you are super, super lethargic that day, just not happening. It's 9 a.m. You haven't had your coffee, something's going on in the family, whatever. You take the test and you do pretty poorly. A month later, you come back in and you are ready to go, right? It's 2 p.m., afternoon coffee, work's going great, right? Everything's super good, and you do really well. So now we have this very inaccurate representation that you may be really improving when, in essence, you could have had decline over that time, and it's just subject to these noise patterns that we just happen to catch you at the top and the bottom on those 2 days. And so the value, like you're saying here, Dr. Jen, is that if we can rise above that noise and put you in a state where that noise is not as prevalent, and we can kind of filter out that bias from the whole process and from the data collection, we know that we have personalized, robust data that can truly be used to show change over time.
See, for me, that's a massive pain point.
It's really,
go ahead.
It's really funny that Ami earlier brought up Daniel Kahneman. Because I think we were talking about Thinking Fast and Slow, wonderful book. Imagine all of us have read it. But his newest book actually alludes to exactly what Henry's talking about, called Noise. I just finished it.
I just started it.
And I think that is the fundamental issue that's going to plague us going forwards, right? Like how can we guarantee that the predictive analytics that we're using today are actually not just picking up on like noisy covariates? And an example that I really like to give around this that stemmed from a lot of my original research was, if I told you my body temperature, my age, and my weight, and then I asked you to tell me if I have a fever, I'd hope both of the medical doctors in the call would use my body temperature. I hope. Now, as medical doctors, you kind of get intuition as to how or the covariates should relate with each other. I mean, hopefully that's the goal of medical school. But when we feed this type of data into large-scale algorithmic systems, we really don't understand the way the covariates interact with each other, especially when we start using deep learning and like large, really, really deep networks that have billions of parameters. Like, if anybody's telling you they know what's going on, they're probably selling you snake oil. So how do we actually audit a system such that we understand that, you know what, this system is not necessarily ready for deployment. It's fit to some noise because it's actually only using my age and my weight in order to determine if I have a fever. Now, maybe that holds in certain cases, but in actuality, that's not really what we intended. So in the short term, there's this interesting auditing question that comes up, and maybe Ami and Jen have some like commentary on this as doctors working in hospitals. Like, how can we get this kind of domain expertise that you have in your head, that some of the hospital administrators have? They have expectations for these systems. How can we ensure that the systems that we're building, that they're trying to use in practice, how can we ensure that they're actually being used as intended?
Yeah, no,
go ahead.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, because you were essentially the founder of telecardiology at Mass General. So you saw this, believed in this like 5 or 10 years ago. Is this the story that I might be recounting the story incorrectly? But you saw it, believed in it like 5 or 10 years ago, and that was because of your patient population's special needs. So you saw it, you built it. You know, did other people see the vision, know the vision? It was a little unclear. And then it just rapidly took off. So you scaled up telecardiology, but you've also built some of the most impressive algorithms or automation, I think, into the Mass General system. And I'd love to hear, you know, what you've already built and reflecting on what Umang has said.
Yeah, so I think this is an area where I'll take a moment and I'll speak to Congress, right? Because right now,
let me highlight right here.
Can I remove my name from the screen when she talks to Congress? I still need them.
So here's the thing. Joking aside, and thank you for the complimentary words, Dr. Joe. But this is an issue that plagues all of medicine, which is that we practice episodic medicine, relying on the education of, you know, very well-meaning, intelligent, scientific minds who are clinicians and doctors. The amount of information that has grown since we graduated from medical school requires continuous learning. We have entire fields that work on continuous learning, you know, and education. We now work on how do we get information at our fingertips when you need it, recognizing that the human brain probably can't carry everything that we need any given time. But our inherent problem in terms of systems is that we practice episodic care. And in large part, that's because the payment system and the infrastructure for healthcare delivery is based on episodic care and not on continuous care. So hearing Henry and Umang talk about the potential for continuously following these people, I'm going to get my X to Y right, and being able to see what a trend looks like this, recognizing that actually it looks like this. And I can't wait to finish the book Noise. It is excellent. Cass Sunstein here at Harvard, one of my mentors, like fantastic person as well, involved in that. But we can't do this. And the noise is only increasing. The number of people with illness is only increasing. And so we need people like Henry, Umang, and the other people we bring on the show who are going to help us do continuous measurement. Yeah. In order to be able to do that. And that means that we need to change the structure of healthcare delivery such that continuous measurement is valued more than episodic care. Episodic care should only be for acute care. And that's where we haven't gotten there yet, but with legislation, we can get there. Now, I'll get off the soapbox. And I will ask, however, moving forward, Umang, when we think about trust in AI and we think about patient trust, but we also think about clinician trust, where do you see us being in 10 years? I realize, you know, we talk and I'm always thinking it's right around the corner and you temper me a little and say it's not around the corner yet, Ami, but it's coming. What do you see as our trajectory? Where does that complementarity go?
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think the problem right now is because we're taking these episodic moments, taking the data that's generated, the noisy, cruddy data that we just discussed, and then feeding it into these large scale systems, and they're mining information. They look good. They sound sexy. You can raise tons of money by convincing people that this episodic data is good enough for me to start an entire organization, an IPO. I don't even know what you want to do these days with that kind of money and these kinds of like brittle systems. But the way I see us going forward is the following. There are three things that I want to discuss. One is like this idea of machine unlearning, the idea of learning to defer, and then this third idea is taking clinician concepts and actually embedding them into systems. So in summary, I think these three directions are really, really interesting for clinicians to be aware of and to realize that they can actually ask their innovation teams inside their hospitals to be aware of these kinds of systems as they come about over the next 4 or 5 years. The idea of machine unlearning is taking a machine learning system that's currently deployed and saying, you know what, that episode is actually incorrect. This data is incorrect. Can you remove it from my system? And as nice as it sounds, we honestly don't have the tools to do that. Yeah, and someone who's telling you we don't know how to do that yet.
No.
So this is something that's quite interesting that over the next few years we'll learn how to take AI systems and on the fly we'll be able to interact with them to tell them to unlearn certain concepts. And this would be really important in clinical settings from what we can see at the moment.
Great point.
I'm just going to say my mind is blown.
It's such a great point.
Yes.
Yeah. So I actually think that these are an increasing order of interestingness to me personally. But the unlearning stuff, I would say, was about a 1 to 2 years away until we have like systems that can start to unlearn, and it's an expectation that the systems will unlearn.
That's great.
The idea of learning to defer, which I think is a second direction that clinical medicine will go in, is there are a lot of cases where doctors are already very good at making a diagnosis. And it's important for us to recognize that. There are certain episodes where we know that there's no noise whatsoever. And if there is no noise, then you can do one of two things. One, we can actually tell AI systems that, you know what, doctors, we already know that you know this example. So I'm actually not even going to try to learn it because I'm only going to focus on the stuff that's really hard for you. And these types of complementary systems can actually allow us to figure out how can we actually dwindle our data set down to the examples that, you know what, we know are noisy, or two, we know like doctors struggle with these examples, or people have a demonstrated history of continuously like performing poorly on these types of examples. And learning to defer it back to the expert at appropriate times is going to be extremely important. Right now, what we do is that we love systems that always provide predictions, but I can guarantee you that you've been interacting with systems that provide you with uncertainty estimates all the time. For example, if you ask Siri a question, Siri might say, I'm searching the web. That is honestly a fancy way of saying, I have no bloody idea what you're talking about. We have these systems, so how does that kind of manifest itself in clinical decision-making settings? And then I think the third idea is the idea of taking concepts that doctors are taught either in their education systems or things that they know to be true and incorporating that into the model learning procedure. What we're doing right now is we're taking data from a single episode and being like, yeah, let's just train a system on it and the system's going to be accurate, or we're going to measure some metrics on it. But in actuality, we can't guarantee that body temperature is the feature that's being used. We have no way of guaranteeing that. We spent a lot of time over the last 2 years convincing people that the methods that people had built to kind of decompose these systems are very brittle. So there's a lot of methods that have been proposed to say, well, how do you know what's important to a system? You can kind of inspect the black box, and we developed a suite of tools to deceive these systems and basically say, no, you don't want to do this. And then we go to legislators and policymakers and say, anybody who's trying to sell you this is probably full of shit. So pardon my language. We basically have gone through the work of telling them that these deceptive tools are scary. But if we, as machine learning practitioners, were told what concepts were clinically relevant, whether this is portions of an X-ray that are essential to look at when actually doing inference on like KL grade, for example, for knee x-rays, like we need to know that so we can incorporate that into the priors in our systems such that we can build predictive systems that behave the same way clinicians do. So to summarize, I think machine learning, learning to defer, and concept learning are three really exciting directions for the future, and they're all within the next decade. I think they'll all be in full flight.
That is fantastic. Yeah, and it's doable, right? What you just said is doable. If administrators and large electronic medical record systems would get on board, unlearning could happen.
Is it doable? This is the first time I've heard it. Is this strange that this is the first time I've heard it? Sorry. Go ahead, Ami.
Let's let Umang answer that, because
I mean, it is doable. We have results where we can do this. So the most recent unlearning result we have is that if a model is biased, we can reduce the model's bias by removing data points that are causing bias. So you might have, in the criminal justice context, you might be told that you can't use data from before the Jim Crow era, and arguably that's quite accurate because we made a lot more black arrests than we did white arrests. But in actuality, we were able to learn that the algorithm itself was able to unlearn the biased behavior that occurred in before the civil rights movement. So it's doable. It's just not used at scale yet. And there's this trade-off between using really complex models and non-complex models that I'm happy to jump into. But we have a lot of work in this space at the moment. So
it's interesting you bring up bias. That's definitely, a lot of what you're talking about. I feel like, bias in AI is definitely one of those things that gets thrown around as like a hit on it. And maybe moving outside of like clinical care and thinking about other healthcare domains that benefit from AI. Let's think of something like medication adherence, right? A huge problem. And I've seen papers on AI that tries to predict medication adherence from a population. But like you just said, I think everybody in the space would know that I probably don't need an AI to tell me that rich white people are more likely to adhere to their medication than not, right? But so how do you, you're saying, like, how do you build a system that takes into account the right things that we know, should be weighted more heavily in this process, that we should be looking for interesting trends in, and avoid just coding a system that propagates bias that we've had in the past. So these techniques that you're mentioning sound kind of like, silver bullet type solutions to a lot of the problematic things that we've seen. My question to you would be, something like machine unlearning, right? Is the answer then you build it now, you let it mess up, and then we make it unlearn stuff later? Or do we have to do things proactively when developing AI to think about that?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. My honest answer to that is it depends on the willingness of the individual stakeholders who are actually using these tools and are going to be held accountable and liable to make those decisions. Like, it's up to them to educate themselves, and for us as machine learning practitioners to come and educate them, do things like this, to basically say things like unlearning exists, such that if you are willing to bite the bullet today and start using AI systems, note that you can unlearn. Because we hope that 5 years from now, unlearning really doesn't need to exist other than in certain cases. But for the most part, we have guarantees, both rigorous theoretical guarantees, but also practical guarantees that clinicians can be sure that the concepts that they know to be true are actually being used by the system. So it really comes down to who's going to be liable. And right now it's the wild, wild west, right? Like, we have no regulation in this space on what to do. So it really comes down to who's the most proactive in that regard.
It's interesting because when we talk about outcomes, we're also talking about, are we talking about long-term clinical outcomes where predicting something may not change what we're doing because it happens over time? Are you talking about diagnosing the cancer next week to get the chemo started, right? And so I think there'll be certain areas, and chronic disease management is probably prime to be one of those first areas where we can look at algorithms and then we can change them and then move forward, right? And get rid of that bias, if you will. I think the other place, and this goes back to what Henry was talking about with kind of predicting moving forward, and this example of, social determinants of health, right? And how we say those oftentimes affect what we see. It's not just knowing those or saying, oh, I could guess that. It's saying, could you, with your predictive analytics, tell me which of these factors, if I change it, is most likely going to make my system more likely to help patients take their medication? Because it's not that they are not adherent. It is that my system is not getting them what they need to be able to take that medicine. So it's on us. And so I think that potential is really interesting in the future, to be able to tell us what we need to change about our systems and our healthcare delivery to be able to be more successful.
And to take the nice wrapper off it, let's just, call a duck a duck. It's not because somebody is Black that they're not taking their medicine. It's what is the process of delivering medication? How is it falling short for that community? Mm-hmm. So how did you basically, within AI, Umang, like that contextual awareness, I suppose, of what, and I know there's terms, for this on the research side of not just building data in, data out type systems, but thinking about the underlying cause. Where does that fit into these kind of concepts you proposed? And does it give me a Band-Aid? Is it too easy of a Band-Aid for me to say, I'm going to build a bias system and then just unlearn things later, and then that's going to be good?
Yeah. There's so much to unpack there, and I'm so excited. Like literally,
and you have 30 seconds.
You're giddy. This is giddy, Umang.
There's a really interesting word that we use in machine learning called recourse, and it is when you have an algorithmic system. We have been thinking recently about providing algorithmic recourse, which allows us to tell individuals what they can change about their individual data point, the features they provided us with, such that we can get a more favorable outcome. So we've thought about this in the context of loans, where you might be denied a loan today, and someone might say, "Come back and give me make $50,000 more, and come back to me, and I'll give you a loan." And similar concepts have been applied on the healthcare side. The hard thing is this contextual awareness that Henry alluded to is just non-existent, because we know by definition, by construct, our data points are insufficient. They do not capture the social factors that underpin the data generating process. Yeah. And we have a lot of work to do on that front as a machine learning community, as a causal inference community, to think about this and work alongside domain experts to build that contextual awareness into our tools. So sorry for the negative answer, but we're not necessarily there yet. I would say unlearning is likely the best way to go for now. And being able to scrutinize your data sets to see where did we go wrong? Were there places we went wrong? We do retros by ourselves in our own teams. We think about times when we made mistakes. It's important for us to keep track of those things such that we don't make those mistakes again. And how can we actually ensure that our AI systems are not making the same mistakes twice?
Oh, I love this. I love it. So I see that we are coming up on 12:45. Thank you guys for spending extra time. Thank you to our audience for spending that time. Comments from the audience?
We just have comments from the audience. Yeah, we do have some regulars who really adore and enjoy our regulars who watch our show. Henry Bernstein, thank you for watching from New Jersey. He works with 3D technologies at Merck. I don't know what Merck is doing with 3D technologies. Maybe Henry will tell us one day.
I want to know.
Maybe Henry should type in what they're doing. And Matthew Van Immen, MD, JD, we have a number of those floating around the Boston space. I don't know where Matthew's from, but in Boston, because we actually have a fair amount floating around the Boston space. I feel like there's a fair amount. We're excited that you got the double degrees. He's watching from Boston. He's an attorney focused on medical devices. Medical devices are changing, and algorithms are difficult to regulate, and the FDA is trying to regulate them, and it's going to be very interesting. So I think one of the pieces, just to speak to what Umang talked to, is now that we're kind of creating a pathway. So the FDA has essentially allowed a pathway that says, hey, we're really interested in AI. We're really interested in algorithms. We're interested in data and real world data. And we want to essentially certify and say this is legit. And it's great for doctors because it takes a little bit of the liability off, and then you can also get payments, and it's wonderful. But one of the pieces I think we need to it's important, we need to think about is once we start essentially certifying these algorithms, how do you prevent drift? Or how does the FDA check on it to prevent drift? Or who's responsible for that? What does it look like? And are there checkpoints? Because FDA has not traditionally had essentially post-certification checkpoints to look at that. And I think it's a little bit of a wild west with that. And Henry, thank you. Okay, Henry, 3D at Merck. 3D Technologies at Merck says, we're doing a lot. PM me. What does PM mean?
Personal message.
Personal message.
Okay. Yeah. Postmenopausal.
Ping me.
Since you brought up the word postmenopausal, by the way, when Umang said age, gender, and temperature. I thought he was heading towards menopause. I didn't think he was heading towards fever. So I wasn't going to bring it up, and now that you said it. Wonderful. We are so grateful for our audience. So maybe just in closing, maybe Umang and then Henry. Our audience is composed of phenomenal people just like you, doing great work at the entrepreneurial level, those who are doing the science, clinicians, and those who are investing in us and helping grow it. They're very different communities, but if there's one thing, since your collective area is a little different than what everybody maybe does every day, if there's one thing you tell people, go read about this and see if it's applicable to you. I realize it's a broad audience. What's the one thing you'd have them go know more about that you wish all these people in this combined industry we've made? So first Umang and then Henry.
Yeah, that's a really loaded question, but I think the most important thing I think people can realize is the limitations associated with learning systems. Specifically, I think it should become mandatory soon. This is a moonshot to learn like simple machine learning and statistics. Some really great books that are really accessible. Andrew Ng's course on Coursera is really great, as well as there's a book by Chris Bishop who's just really tangible. And I imagine all the scientists in this room would find that a breeze and pretty palatable. But really understanding like what am I trying to predict? When not just using AI for the sake of it. I know that a lot of folks really like saying they use AI systems, but in actuality, you're not really using AI systems. You don't really need these large-scale models to just take episodic data and predict outcomes. Thinking clearly and critically and coming to the table with like a sobering perspective on why you're using AI systems will really help you in the short term, like maximize the use of the AI in your company, as well as ensure that your outcomes won't be adverse and you'll end up like not having like brittle, non-transparent, unfair outcomes. And then I think that keep an eye out for these ideas of machine learning, learning to defer, and concept learning, because your data science teams are going to start talking about those and thinking more critically about those as they themselves start having more domain expertise in healthcare.
Wonderful. Henry, to you?
Yeah, I'd say, Umang does a great job of painting us an objective picture of where we are today. I think for those in this space that are excited about tomorrow and what we can do, I'd say to keep a pulse on what is happening at both a consumer level and a clinical level when it comes to data and prediction. Apple loves to tout that they are, their biggest impact on the world is going to be in healthcare. And I'll tell you, it's not because they're going to sell you an MRI, right? It's going to come from the data that they're collecting from you, and the things we can do from a health perspective with that data are going to be huge. In our world, obviously in brain health, we are really confident and excited about providing the highest resolution, most granular data today, because we know that's what's going to feed these beautiful algorithms that Umang is going to build tomorrow. So the excitement around being part of that quantified self movement, being able to get your data to contribute to the future of insights and discovery in this space, I think it's a really unique moment in history and healthcare's history as well, to be at the nexus of healthcare data, of the personalization of care, the ubiquity of these connected devices, and what we can do with that from a prediction perspective.
Fantastic. This was such an exciting day for us. Henry Peck, Dr. Umang Bhatt, such a pleasure to have you. Great to know that you are both college buddies and been supporting each other for a long time, but also that you're both at the cutting edge of predictive analytics, of thinking about the science and the implementation. It's funny, you come on the heels of last week's show where we were talking with Iora Health and we were talking with Flare Capital, and they were talking about how to change the care delivery model. They were talking about investing and how investing is just kind of going to go up in this area. And when I put those things together with you today, I see such a bright future for the delivery of healthcare, because I really think it's going to be great. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our audience. Dr. Jennifer, Joe, I will give you last word.
Thank you to our audience, as always, for watching. We are here every Tuesday at 12 noon. I really enjoyed this conversation with the bright and brilliant Umang and Henry. I haven't been on Clubhouse, and that was because I didn't have an iPhone. But I just didn't have an iPhone.
Excited to have you now.
But I do have an iPhone. Now, very excited about what you guys are doing in a very thoughtful way. And excited about how, these are the type of innovations that I think you lay the foundation And it's just going to be disruptive to how we treat patients or how we deliver healthcare in a certain way. And the fact that you're so thoughtful about it. Wonderful to have you on a show. Again, thank you to our audience. And this is me and Dr. Bhatt saying goodbye. And until next Tuesday at 12 noon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.